Well, hello everyone. I wanted to put together another video to talk about another facet of research that we do. If you haven't already watched the video on descriptive research, I would suggest you do that one first if at all possible. Uh, Otherwise, you can get into this one and that's perfectly fine, but you need to really watch all three. I want to talk about what is called experimental research. Experimental research simply means that if we're going to do studies in terms of human development, we're going to do a study in such a way that we are going to manipulate those subjects that are around us. Okay, we are going to manipulate something about the subjects that are involved. All right. Um, Typically this is a controlled setting and we are going to expose them to things. We're going to see what changes occur because of exposure to these certain things, and then we're going to record them and go from there. That is what I mean by an experimental research study. Okay, unlike a descriptive study where you turn around and in a descriptive study you just observe whatever is there, with an experimental study you turn around and manipulate things within a controlled environment. One of the first things I want to talk about is what is called an independent variable. An independent variable in an experiment is anything that you manipulate, anything that you manipulate in a study. Okay, I will sometimes refer to this as an IV. And when it comes to an independent variable in a study, this is that which you have control over. I don't really like to use the word control because that'll confuse you. Anything that you can manipulate. For example, let's say that I would like to conduct a research study, research on studying, on the actual physical act of studying before taking a quiz. Okay, so I might turn around and set up a classroom where one class gets to spend 10 minutes of study time before taking a quiz, and in a completely different classroom, they do not get to study before taking their quiz. And so studying is that which I is my independent variable. It is that which I manipulate. Okay, so in such an example, my IV or independent variable would be studying, anything that you can manipulate in an experiment. A dependent variable in the simplest way is your results. That's what a dependent variable is. The dependent variable is your results. Okay, for the most part, when it comes to a dependent variable, the technical definition is any change that occurs because of exposure to an independent variable. And some would look at me and say, you mean the results? Yes. So a dependent variable, or DV, is the outcome of the experiment. So if I'm looking at studying and quiz scores, the dependent variable may be how one class does who got to study and what their class average on their quiz was versus another class that did not get to study and what their class average on a quiz was. So the dependent variable in that regard is the difference in scores. An experimental group is any group that you expose the independent variable to. Okay, they have the independent variable placed upon them. Okay, so that's what an experimental group. The experimental group is the group that has the independent variable placed upon them. So if, for example, my 10 o'clock class turns around and gets to study before taking a quiz, but my 12 o'clock class does not. All right. The 10 o'clock class would technically be referred to as the experimental group because they got to study. Some people say, well, wouldn't the 12 o'clock be the experimental group because they didn't get it? The fact that you don't receive something isn't receiving something. Okay. The 10 o'clock class receives something. They receive the opportunity to study. So they are the experimental group. The 12 o'clock class, in my example here, might be referred to as a control group. A control group, in the strictest sense, is any group that has nothing done to them. The independent variable is not, they're not exposed to it. Okay. So, people sometimes ask, why would you turn around and have a group or have a subject that you don't do anything to? Why have them if you don't do anything to them? Well, they form your baseline. They form your comparison. You've got to have something to compare to. So you have your one group that gets to study and the other group that doesn't study. Okay, the 12 o'clock class, as I'm explaining my example, is my control group. All right, they form my baseline. They are the people for whom I get to compare all of this to. Okay, so that's what makes them the group in question here. Okay, so these are four very important elements. You need to know them as part of experimental research. We can get into a great deal more detail on experimental research, but this, the IV, the DV, the experimental group and control group, that's enough for now. Okay, take care.